What happens, you take a micro speaker and you shrink it. You end up with the JBL GO3. So this is the latest JBL GO. That's why it's called the JBL GO3. It's even smaller than the so-called Micro Tribit Stormbox Micro. And indeed, it's lighter. 290 grams for a speaker that can already go in your pocket. 210 grams, nearly 30% less in weight than the Tribit Stormbox Micro. And what have we got? Have we got something that can take on the micro speakers? Or is it nearly a micro, but not quite, which is still maybe handy? I have to say, it's a smaller speaker, but it's kind of slightly chunkier. Although I do like the design, quite a funky design, certainly very rugged. But there's things I like about it, there's things I don't. I have to say, it's a micro speaker because the price is not that much less than the Tribit. So with the Tribit coming in at £40 and not so much less than a micro, £35. £40, £35. Is it worth saving £5 when both speakers will go in your pocket? What are the pluses and minuses of both speakers? So let's compare them. As I say right off the bat, first of all, the passive radiator appears to be designed to be prominent, so prominent that you're not going to really be able to play it like that. It's going to start wobbling. You can see it's got these protruding yellow stripes. Clearly, they tuned it to be, well, they've designed it to be played face on axis. Now, I would also say the tuning of the Tribit Stormbox Micro seems to be on axis, although it's not such a steady thing to put it on its side. But what you do get is a removable strap, clearly aimed to be attached to something, and you're still likely to hold it or to play it on axis. And that's really important with these speakers because the tuning is going to be quite different when you listen off axis, on axis. Why? Because you're going to lose a lot of that high end. So normally when a speaker is off axis like that, noticeably all the mini rigs, if you hold it on axis, it's going to sound quite shrill because they purposely have a boost in the high end because then it sounds even that way down. So it really does matter whether you're going to have it on axis or off axis, because speakers like this, you're not going to have 30 feet away from you. Obviously, they're not ghetto blasters. It's actually quite important. You're going to be close up, and so orientation does matter. But I would say both of these play nicely on axis, that is facing you, and indeed seems the JBL GO Flip, which has a ropey type thing, but it doesn't have the really handy band of both the Bose Micro and the Tribit Micro, so that doesn't come apart. So it's only going to really be something that you can hoop through. It's not like handlebar friendly as in the micro type speaker, the Tribit Micro type speaker. But clearly, you play it that way. The controls on top, and indeed being the latest speaker, it's Bluetooth 5.1. We've got Bluetooth 5 on the Tribit Micro. We've got USB-C charging on both of these speakers. There we have it on the Go, and there we have it on the Micro. Now, big difference in terms of battery. 750 milliamp hour battery. It's only a little battery, you know, for not that much smaller than the Micro, whereas the Micro actually has a 2,600 milliamp hour battery. So you're expecting that to be, if they play as loud as each other, you expect that to show in the battery stakes, and indeed, it's the opposite of what you might expect. I can play this for 2 hours, 2 minutes on maximum, the JBL GO Flip, and I can only play this for 1 hour, 10 minutes on the Tribit Micro. 66%, still the same story, 3 hours, 50 minutes, and 6 hours, 30 minutes. And I think I will be explaining that later on in the comparison. You'll see why probably there's only half the battery life on the Tribit. Now, in terms of latency, much better on the JBL GO in my testing. Not quite really usable on YouTube at 150 milliseconds, but just about usable at 100 milliseconds for the JBL GO. Both IPX7, but the Tribit will not float, it will sink. The JBL GO3 will actually float, it'll float upwards, and you can actually play it like that. On paper, 9 watts, 4.2 watts. I don't know how they come up with the 0.2, but 4.2 watts. Half the power of the Tribit. Both, as you probably would expect, SPC basic codecs, and I will say 750 milliamp hour battery, but when I actually charged it, I actually managed to get 815 milliamp hours worth of capacity into that battery, so probably a little bit better than they're saying. And the big question is, come on out, how do they sound? I'm going to start off, going to be playing them both on axis, and I'm going to do a 60% test. Play at 60%, the JBL is a little bit quieter, which means I'm playing the Tribit Stormbox Micro at 53%.
The way that you can't love. We should have never let this go. No, we were the catch on the summer nights. Kids in the street that got it right. Every time I felt to let go. Every time I felt to let go. We've seen it over, and don't get me wrong, but I'm done with these games. But I'll hold on to faith. You and I are stuck on this. I can't seem to let us go. It's not too late. Just tell me no faith this time. You can knock me down, but I'll find a way. She said you don't know. She said you don't know. If this is what you want, if you wanna go.
JBL GO3, Tribit Stormbox Micro. Thing to note, stronger high end on the GO3. In terms of bass, obviously, as you can hear, really not there on the GO3. So down to about 160 hertz. JBL GO3 can hold its own. Minus 24, 23.5, basically the same. But straight after that, you've got the roll off on the GO3 by 110 hertz. The GO3 is already 2.5 decibels down, where officially it plays down to, according to the JBL specs. And by semi-deep bass, 80 hertz or 18 dB down on the micro. So basically we know the JBL GO3, it plays a high end, it has a bright high end, but you've got no bass basically from 150 hertz down. So 66% the Tribit and the JBL overlaid over each other. JBL GO3 is in brown, Tribit in green, and as you can see, there is a stronger, brighter high end on the JBL GO3. But the main difference is the peak here on the JBL GO3 is higher than the peak at its base. It's a bright speaker. The Stormbox Micro, the bass peak is higher than the high end, and by a bigger margin than the other way around on the GO3. And there is the difference in the sound of the two speakers. One's more bass heavy and the other is high end clarity heavy. Because in terms of bass, take the sweet spot for the JBL GO3. So about 71 dB, down by 3 dB as I like to do, 68 dB. And you can say bass plays down to about 100 hertz. Basically, as JBL say, do the same with the Stormbox Micro, 68, and you can say it plays down to about 80 hertz. There is a huge difference in how these speakers are tuned. So there you see why half the battery life. It's got half the battery life because it's got like twice the bass. It's worth remembering, 300 hertz down is half the power. 300 hertz up is the other half the power. There's a lot more power goes into the bass in terms of driving it. So if you don't drive anything, you know, below 150 hertz basically, which is the case with the JBL GO3, and you are having a reasonable bass with the Stormbox Micro, that's eating up your battery. That's why there's half the battery, because it's in kind of terms twice the bass. If you can do without bass, still a decent listen. Certainly very clear and very, very bright. Turn it up a little bit now. We're going to do an 80% test, and actually at these volumes, 80% is 83% on the Stormbox Micro.
I've been looking for answers, something more. Holding the past in my hands, now I'm fighting for someone I've ignored.
Now the thing is, it's a brighter speaker, like 4 kilohertz and up. It's stronger on the JBL GO3 compared to the Tribit Stormbox Micro. And when you add that to the fact that there isn't the bass weight, it is a clearer sounding speaker. If you want to hear vocals, it does one thing I think well, you know, in what you can expect for 35 quid at this size, and that's vocals. They are clear and they're forward. And playing it on its own, it's still an enjoyable listen, I have to tell you. You know, when you have it A and B against a speaker that is doing bass, it's going to make it sound a bit silly. But on its own, in reality, it's not a bad listen. It's quite a fun little thing for 35 quid, very travel friendly. I really like the form factor and it's pretty funky. It does what it does. Ain't going to give you bass. If you don't want bass anyway, probably going to sound quite nice. It's certainly, you know, even if you're going to have it just to play radios off your phone or podcasts off your phone or something like that. Very, very, very clear and very forward vocals. Enough that you don't really miss the bass that much because that's quite fun on its own. The way a little thing like that can actually project the vocals, but of course you do get the bass, and if you need bass and if you're listening for bass, I mean it's night and day. But I have to say that clarity almost makes the Stormbox Micro sound a little bit muddy. Now I will say at least you get decent packaging with the Stormbox Micro. I don't think there's only 5 quid in it, and depending on the deal, might not be anything in it. Certainly you do get discounts with the Tribit. You get a little plastic thing with the JBL. Now, it's not a big deal. I know, you've only get a plastic box. You're going to throw that away probably anyway. Or maybe not, because you might be eBaying it later on. You may be selling it later on eBay and keeping the box. Just to tell you what you get with it, there's that little manual. And indeed, you get your USB-C little lead. Push. Oh, there you go. They handily give you that. It's only a little dinky thing, not that that's a deal breaker. So you probably want to know, okay, you've been normalizing. A lot of people, I know a lot of you complaining, well, you're normalizing it. Look, whatever way you test this speaker is going to favor one over the other. As far as I'm concerned, the fairest way is trying to level the volumes, the loudness in some way. And probably the fairest way, I think, is in terms of LUFS, but it can be skewed depending on, especially when one is more high end and the other one is more bass, and where that LUFS, you know, is actually weighted, because it is a weighted measurement at the end of the day. But I know a lot of you don't like to say, well, you've got a loudspeaker and a quiet speaker and it favours the quiet. Well, it doesn't, and it's quite the opposite. If you play them at different volumes, if you just played it at the same volume as you had on your phone, the loudest, the one that has the different, because some of them can be louder low down, but still the same volume high up. It's because it's not linear, the volume sets on these speakers. They do tune them in a different way to have more weight, or go louder, slower, or quicker than other speakers. You've got to, it's because you're not looking at the volume, are you? When you're doing it on your phone, you're listening. So I think the fairest way is get them to the volume. They are the same in perceived terms to your ear, and then any tiny bit of difference later on, adjust and normalize that. So when I say normalizing, I should point out, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of normalizing. What I'm actually doing is measuring all along the volume steps what the actual volume is and then playing them at those appropriate volumes. So the normalizing is only a tiny fraction of me matching them. To me, that is the fairest way to compare speakers. But whatever I do, some people aren't happy. Now, maximum volume, what actually happens? How far can you push them? What is the big difference between these, a 4.2 watt speaker and a 9 watt speaker?
I was born to be free.
I was born to be free.
Maximum volume GO3, Stormbox Micro. By the time you hit maximum volume, there isn't that much difference in the high end, where at lower volumes the GO3 is definitely brighter. You can see the high end on both is around the minus 45 dB mark. Those peaks are minus 45, and it's about the same on the Micro. But the Micro holds on to bass, which was never there on the GO3. So the difference in high end is less, but the bass is still there on the Micro. So by maximum volume, any advantage they had in vocals and clarity on the GO3 is now gone. But the GO3 probably does maybe better than you expected. It's only 2 dB down in absolute volume terms. In terms of actual peak, it's almost nothing in it. If we have a look at that bass, even at 150 hertz, GO3 is 3 dB down, but as soon as you start dropping, 5 dB down, 100 hertz, and by 75 hertz, 18 dB down. So pretty much the same difference as we've seen all the way through, except now even the high-end advantage that GO3 had has gone.
So it does even out when you get the maximum volume. I am surprised how loud the 4.2 watts goes against the Micro. Well, but I shouldn't have been, should I? Because at the end of it, as I said, it's not having to push any bass, because it never had pretensive bass there to start with. Under 150 hertz, there's nothing to reduce because it wasn't there to start with, whereas the Stormbox Micro is holding on to some basses, and as I said, takes a lot more power to drive the bass end than the rest of it. That's why when you get a lot of these speakers, they drop the bass, not just about distortion, but by dropping the bass or favouring mids and highs, it can go louder because it's easier to drive. However, it's not as clear when you hit maximum volume, and the Tribit really comes into its own. We're still talking 35, 40 quid. We're not talking massive amount of money, and we're talking both speakers could go in a jacket pocket very easily. But certainly once you get to maximum volume, Stormbox Micro shows why it's got a bigger battery and why it's got half the battery life and why it is slightly bigger. Where is that all that going? All I will say is plain black. You know, at least you know, there's more design elements going into JBL, and of course they are more about fashion accessories than serious speakers for some people. You probably love your JBL, but serious tuning on the Tribit. But the design's gone out the window. If we could get something in between the design and... Oh, and I should point out, actually, one huge big difference, and I should have pointed out right at the beginning, compare two of these into stereo. You can't pair this. That was a surprise to me. You can't pair the JBL GO, not wirelessly anyway. You can do hookups, obviously. Well, you can't actually, because there's no auxiliary on this particular one. So you can't even do a wired stereo. So obviously we got Bluetooth 5, you can have some exotic ways of doing it, but off the bat, natively, you can't pair two of these in stereo. Still, to me, a huge miss, because look, these Chinese knockoffs, I call them knockoffs, because they come out cheap from China, can easily do stereo pairing, and yet JBL, with all their might, all their design ethos, won't even let us pair. A couple of those in stereo as a pair, to me, it's going to make even more of a reason to buy, especially at that price, to buy two. But no, JBL, of course, you cannot do that. So to round off this comparison between a Micro and a Micro with the JBL GO3, why would you get one over the other? Well, A, you could save 5 quid at actual retail prices. It is slightly lighter if weight is a huge deal to you. And it looks prettier than the Stormbox Micro, but you get a far more serious sound with the Tribit Stormbox Micro. In terms of the bass is there, you can listen to a complete track and have some sort of analytical listen if that's what you wanted. You can't do that with JBL. There isn't any pretensive bass, but it's a very clear sounding. If all you want is a very clear sounding speaker and you can drop it in a pool and it's basically a throwaway speaker, then JBL GO3 is your geezer, I guess. Hope you got something out of my comparison video, and I thank you for watching.